From the very first day at school, Mia felt different. While other kids laughed together, shared secrets, and formed groups, she often found herself sitting alone, staring at her lunch tray, wondering why she didn't belong. Every birthday, every group project, every class outing reminded her of the emptiness she felt around her. She would watch her classmates whispering and giggling, and a heavy sense of isolation would settle in her chest. Over time, she began to think that something was inherently wrong with her, that maybe she was unworthy of friendship, that maybe she was broken in a way no one could fix. She tried to hide it, smiled when people looked at her, and said things like, "I'm fine," but deep down, the loneliness gnawed at her. Social media made it worse. Pictures of friends hanging out, attending parties, going on trips, or sharing inside jokes flooded her screen every day. Each scroll made her feel more invisible, more disconnected, as if the world was full of people who fit in perfectly while she was left on the outside. One rainy afternoon, Mia found herself sitting on a park bench, watching raindrops ripple the puddles on the ground. She noticed two strangers nearby having a conversation. Their words reached her unexpectedly, as if the universe had chosen that moment to speak to her. They spoke about being alone and how it had allowed them to discover their own strengths, their passions, and a sense of self that no group or friendship had ever given them. Mia listened intently, a flicker of hope stirring inside her. Could it be possible that being alone wasn't a curse but an opportunity to understand herself better? For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she didn't measure her worth by the number of people around her. From that moment, Mia made a quiet but deliberate choice. She would stop chasing friendships just for the sake of fitting in or feeling less lonely. Instead, she would focus on discovering what truly brought her joy. She dusted off her old sketchbook and started painting again, feeling the rush of colors and the freedom of creation she hadn't felt in years. She wrote stories she never shared, pouring her thoughts and dreams into words, finding that her own voice was comforting in ways the company of others had never been. Mia joined online communities where she could learn, grow, and connect on her own terms, without the pressure of forced social interactions. The world she had once viewed as lonely started to feel like a place full of possibilities. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and Mia began noticing a remarkable transformation. She was learning to enjoy her own company, to find peace in quiet moments, and to understand herself without needing validation from others. The empty spaces in her days no longer felt heavy or painful, they became her sanctuary, her laboratory for self-discovery. She realized that solitude did not equate to failure or brokenness. Instead, it was a powerful chance to nurture her passions, to develop skills, and to build confidence that no group or friendship could give her. One day, Mia decided to showcase her artwork at a local exhibition. She had few expectations and no need for approval, but she wanted to share her creations with the world. To her surprise, people genuinely appreciated her work. They were not friends she had tried desperately to gain approval from. They were individuals who resonated with her passion and admired her dedication. Conversations flowed naturally, ideas were exchanged, and Mia began to understand that meaningful connections do not need to be numerous, they only need to be genuine. A few people who truly understand and respect you are worth far more than a crowd that doesn't. Years passed, and Mia's life continued to grow richer in ways she had never imagined. She became a successful writer and artist, known not for the number of friends she had, but for the depth of her creativity and the authenticity of her voice. She maintained a few close, meaningful friendships, people who valued her for who she was, not for the facade she could present. She often spoke to young people who felt lost in the crowd, telling them that having few or no friends does not mean you are broken or incomplete. It means you have a unique opportunity to discover yourself, to explore your talents, and to understand your own worth independently of others. True happiness, she explained, comes not from everyone liking you, but from loving who you are when you are alone, from finding peace and contentment in your own company. Mia learned that being alone is not a void to be feared or filled with the wrong people just to feel included. It is a space where self-discovery can flourish, where dreams can grow, and where strength can be cultivated quietly and steadily. She realized that life is not about fitting into every social circle, but about creating a life so meaningful and rich that people naturally gravitate toward you. Being alone taught her resilience, creativity, patience, and the profound beauty of self-reliance. She had transformed her loneliness into her greatest ally, her solitude into a canvas for a life full of purpose, joy, and fulfillment. In the end, Mia discovered that her worth was never dependent on how many people were around her. She was never broken. She was simply learning to love herself, embrace her uniqueness, and live a life that reflected her true passions and values. After deciding to stop chasing friendships just for the sake of fitting in, Mia began to explore her own world with a sense of curiosity and determination she had never felt before. She realized that the hours she once spent worrying about being excluded could instead be invested in discovering herself, her talents, and her passions. She started with small steps, picking up her old sketchbook and painting again. The strokes of the brush across the paper became a form of therapy, a way to express emotions she hadn't been able to put into words. Each color, each line, each experiment with shading or form reminded her that she could create her own joy, independent of anyone else's approval or presence. She also began writing, filling notebooks with short stories, reflections, and ideas that had long been buried in her mind. Writing became her private sanctuary, a place where her thoughts were valid simply because they existed. She didn't share them at first. She didn't post them online. She didn't expect anyone to read them or validate them. And yet, as she continued, she began to notice a change within herself. There was a quiet confidence that grew in the space where loneliness had once weighed her down. She realized that her own company was not something to fear, it was something to treasure. Mia also explored activities she had once felt too shy or insecure to try. She took a photography class, learning how to capture moments, light, and emotions in ways that felt deeply personal. She joined online communities related to her interests, where she could learn, discuss, and grow without the pressure of face-to-face social expectations. In these spaces, she discovered people who were encouraging, insightful, and supportive, yet she never felt the need to fit in artificially. She was free to be herself, unapologetically. Slowly, Mia began to notice subtle but profound shifts in how she perceived herself. She no longer measured her worth by how many invitations she received or how often someone called her. She no longer felt incomplete when she returned home to an empty room. In fact, she started to look forward to quiet evenings, where she could reflect, read, paint, and write without interruptions or judgments. Her solitude became her playground, her laboratory for self-discovery, a place where her inner voice grew stronger and more confident every day. One afternoon, while sitting in a small cafe with her sketchbook open, Mia overheard a conversation about an art exhibition that encouraged young artists to submit their work. On a whim, she decided to participate, not because she wanted recognition, but because she wanted to see how far her passion could take her. She worked tirelessly, perfecting her pieces and experimenting with ideas that were uniquely hers. When she submitted her work, she felt a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. She didn't care whether she would be praised or ignored, simply completing the project for herself was enough. When the exhibition came, Mia was nervous but excited. She walked through the gallery, observing other artists' work, and reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. And then, to her amazement, people started stopping at her paintings, admiring the colors, the emotion, and the uniqueness of her style. They asked her questions, praised her work, and showed genuine interest in what she had created. It was not about gaining friends, it was about sharing a part of herself that mattered deeply, and being seen for it. Mia realized that meaningful connections did not need to be numerous, they needed to be authentic. One or two people who truly appreciated you were far more valuable than dozens who barely noticed you. Through this experience, Mia began to understand that being alone had never been a punishment or a flaw. It had been a gift, giving her time to grow, explore, and cultivate her own strengths. She began to embrace her individuality with pride, understanding that her value was not determined by how many people surrounded her, but by how fully she lived her life and honored her passions. She had learned resilience, patience, and self-reliance, and she had discovered that the world could be a place of connection and inspiration if she approached it with authenticity and courage. Mia's transformation was quiet but profound. She learned to enjoy the present moment without anxiety about acceptance or rejection. She became more empathetic, understanding that many people struggle with their own feelings of loneliness, and that connection is more about depth than quantity. By focusing on her own growth, she attracted people who resonated with her energy, not those who sought to impose superficial companionship. Slowly but surely, Mia built a life that was meaningful, fulfilling, and aligned with her true self. She realized that her journey had shown her the greatest truth: solitude is not something to fear, it is an opportunity to cultivate inner strength, creativity, and self-love. By the time Mia reflected on this chapter of her life, she understood that she had grown in ways she never imagined possible. She no longer saw being alone as a sign of weakness. Instead, she recognized it as a stepping stone toward self-discovery and empowerment. The very experiences that once caused her pain had become the foundation of her confidence, her art, and her purpose. Mia had discovered that a meaningful life was not defined by the number of friends you have, but by the authenticity with which you live, the passions you pursue, and the love you develop for yourself. Years passed, and Mia's life continued to evolve in ways she had never imagined when she had first felt the sharp sting of loneliness. She had grown not just in skill and creativity, but in the understanding of herself and what truly mattered. Over time, she had become a successful artist and writer, not because she had been seeking the approval of others, but because she had embraced her own journey, her passions, and her unique perspective. Her life was no longer measured by the number of friends or social circles she could enter. Instead, it was defined by authenticity, purpose, and a sense of fulfillment that came from within. Mia maintained a few close and meaningful relationships, people who genuinely cared for her, understood her, and supported her growth. She realized that it was not necessary to have a large group of friends to feel connected or to live a rich life. True friendship, she discovered, was about depth, honesty, and shared values, not quantity. She often reflected on how far she had come from the lonely girl sitting in classrooms and parks, wondering if she was broken. She smiled at the thought that the very solitude she had once feared had been the catalyst for her transformation. She also understood that the journey had been as important as the destination. Every lonely afternoon, every quiet evening spent writing or painting, every moment of self-reflection had contributed to her strength, resilience, and clarity of purpose. Mia realized that being alone had given her the freedom to explore her passions without distraction, the space to grow without judgment, and the courage to embrace her individuality. Loneliness was not a void to be feared, it was a gift waiting to be unwrapped, full of possibilities. Mia began sharing her story with others, especially young people who felt lost, isolated, or misunderstood. She spoke at workshops, online forums, and small gatherings, encouraging them to see solitude not as a flaw but as a stepping stone. She told them that having few or no friends did not mean they were broken, incomplete, or unworthy of love and success. Instead, it was an opportunity to discover themselves, to build skills, to cultivate passions, and to develop the confidence that comes only from truly knowing and accepting oneself. Her message was simple yet profound. Life is not about fitting in or being liked by everyone, it is about living authentically and finding joy and fulfillment within. Through her experiences, Mia also learned to recognize the subtle difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone was empowering, a choice to focus on personal growth and self-understanding. Being lonely, she realized, was the fear of emptiness or the need for external validation. By embracing her alone time, she had transformed potential loneliness into creative energy, self-discovery, and meaningful accomplishments. This insight became a cornerstone of her message: inspiring others to reframe their perceptions of solitude and to see it as a powerful tool for growth. Mia's career flourished because she had learned to pursue her passions wholeheartedly, without fear of judgment or rejection. Her art and writing resonated with people who shared her values, her sensitivity, and her appreciation for authenticity. She built connections not through superficial popularity but through shared understanding and genuine engagement. Her audience, her peers, and her few close friends admired her not because she was part of a crowd, but because she had embraced herself fully, and in doing so, had created something truly remarkable. Perhaps the most important lesson Mia learned was that happiness does not come from the approval or presence of others. It comes from the peace, satisfaction, and love you cultivate within yourself. She had discovered that when you no longer seek validation externally, life becomes clearer, lighter, and more joyful. The insecurities that once plagued her, worrying if she was enough, if anyone liked her, if she would ever belong, had dissolved, replaced by a quiet confidence rooted in self-acceptance. She had become the person she needed when she was young, offering herself the friendship, understanding, and encouragement she had once longed for. Looking back, Mia often thought about the lonely moments she had feared so deeply. She realized that every tear, every pang of isolation, and every anxious thought had been part of a greater plan, guiding her toward self-discovery, resilience, and purpose. She had turned what once felt like weakness into strength, pain into creativity, and solitude into fulfillment. Mia's story became a testament to the fact that being alone is not something to fix or fear, it is an opportunity to cultivate one's inner world and to build a life of authenticity, passion, and depth. Mia often ended her talks with these words: "Having few or no friends does not mean you are broken. It means you have the chance to discover yourself, to nurture your talents, and to create a life that is meaningful to you. True happiness comes not from everyone liking you, but from loving yourself deeply and living fully in your own truth. Your solitude is not your weakness, it is your greatest strength waiting to be embraced." By embracing her solitude and valuing her own journey, Mia transformed her life in ways she had never imagined. She realized that the girl who once thought she was broken was never broken at all. She had simply been learning the most important lesson of all, that self-love, authenticity, and purpose are the keys to a life of fulfillment, and that the absence of many friends does not diminish the richness of a life lived fully. Mia had turned loneliness into empowerment, isolation into creativity, and her own company into a lifelong source of joy and strength, showing the world that a life with few or no friends can still be extraordinary, inspiring, and deeply meaningful.